Well, hello there. It's Robert here with some of his country music collection. Wanted to share with you people today. Wanted to show off a few things. I remember last time my video was turned around the other way, so I hope it's better this time. I got to watch those things. Sometimes I get a little too much of a hurry. But wanted to share a few interesting things from over the years on some of the older country music that I enjoy collecting. So first, I'll share this little gem. This album came out in 1960. It was Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, Foggy Mountain Banjo. They were more traditional instrumentals such as Home Sweet Home, John Henry, Fireball Mail, Bugle Call Rag, and others. But it was a fine bluegrass album. It was good music, good clean playing. It was some of that old Foggy Mountain sound. Real nice album. Very popular too, very influential. Foggy Mountain Banjo. Next, one of the early Ray Price albums. From the late 50s, Talk to Your Heart. He had been recording actually since about 49, and then in the early 50s going for Columbia. This was an LP he recorded in the studio about 57, I believe, or 58 could be, of Talk to Your Heart. That is a remake of his earlier hit, but it was that good country shuffle beat. Good fiddle and steel guitar. Come out at a time, a lot of Nashville sound records were coming out in the late 50s, and this was a good country release from Ray. Also, one of the earlier George Jones albums, White Lightning. This album came out in 59 and features some of the late 50s recordings for the Mercury label. It was in his earlier years. He had been recording for a few years, had released a couple other albums, but this stands as a very good album in itself with the hit of White Lightning. Just others that were popular at the time, such as Flame in My Heart, You're Back Again, Life to Go. He wrote that song, which also became a hit for Stonewall Jackson. So a nice George Jones album there of his earlier years. Then we have a little old early years of Wanda Jackson, Rockin' with Wanda. This was her second Capitol album. This came out around 58. It was not so much songs she recorded at the time. It was a collection of her singles from around 56, 57, and 58 for Capitol, including Fujiyama Mama, Hot Dog That Made Him Mad, Mean Mean Man, Baby Loves Him, Cool Love, and Honey Bop. But a nice LP of Wanda, and very tough to find too. And then one of my favorite bluegrass bands, right there along with Flatt and Scruggs. I love Don Reno and Red Smalley. Really, you need to give them a listen if you have not really gotten into them. The banjo playing is phenomenal. It's actually a little touch different than Earl Scruggs. So it's still the three-finger style, but you put a needle on the record and you could hear if it's a Flatt and Scruggs or Reno and Smalley right away. Their harmony too is outstanding, and this featured a mixture of instrumentals that they recorded in the 50s of Banjo, Signal, Remington Ride, Green Mountain Hop. Also were the popular songs such as I'm the Talk of the Town, Please Don't Feel Sorry for Me. Also Emotions appeared on this LP. Next, it's a nice Johnny Horton album. This came out after his death, but it was his mid-50s, 56 and 7 and 8 cuts for Columbia. It was not quite the saga song or historic sound of Battle of New Orleans and Sink the Bismarck and those, but most of these was an earlier honky-tonk, a little bit of mixture of rockabilly style with the honky-tonk man, I'm coming home, I got a hold of my P-Rogue, I'm a one-woman man, every time I'm kissing you. Just a very fine Johnny Horton album. There were a couple also that had been released right before he died. Old Slewfoot actually appeared on this album as well. Next is another very tough one to get. This was the first RCA album of Jim Reeves. This came out in 56. He started recording for RCA in 55. This is in his earlier honky-tonk, straight-ahead country style. Have I Told You Lately That I Love You was on this album. Oklahoma Hills, Your Old Love Letters, Tweedle Twill, but it's not the pop flavorings of later years of Jim Reeves, but this is the early years with the fiddle and the steel guitar, his own band. This came out right around the time, or perhaps slightly after his Abbott album. So this is the earlier country style with Jim Reeves, which is makes for some very good listening. This is the first 12-inch LP of Hank Thompson, and this came out in the early 50s. This featured Wild Side of Life along with a number of other good songs, but nice early Hank Thompson release. This one came from the early 60s. It's Mel Tillis' earlier work. Mel Tillis had been recording since 57 for Columbia. This is an album he made in the very early 60s, around 61 or 2. And this is the earliest Mel Tillis album release. But to get a chance to listen to some of his earlier style, this, and then there was a Harmony album I showed earlier, a week or two ago, which also contained some of those early cuts. Another very interesting artist, Sheb Wooley. He made a number of recordings through the 50s and 60s, and trying to find those 50s recordings, if you go back before Purple People Eater, back in his earlier country years, they can be a little tough to find. One LP that was released back around the mid-50s was this one right here of him. And it featured a number of songs that you just don't hear so much anymore. Blue Guitar, Texas Tango, Hillbilly Mambo, I Go Out of My Mind. But it all makes for a very nice Sheb Wooley album. And some of his other later MGM cuts were good as well. But this is the early Sheb Wooley. And then if you can hear in the background, an album I'm playing now, Louvin Brothers. This was an album they made in 57. It's actually their last album with the guitarist of the time, Paul Yandel, which was with them on their mid-50s records. This is what is playing in the background now. Probably the best RCA, and there was a couple in Camden that were good, but Eddie Arnold release was Anytime. This came out also back in the mid-50s. This was his 46 and 47 recordings. Featured the originals of Bouquet of Roses, It's a Sin, That's How Much I Love You, I'll Hold You in My Heart, Anytime, and others. And he was not served too well by his record company with his very early recordings. I think in some cases he didn't want some of them himself released too much. But they're probably his best recordings. They featured a steel guitar of Little Roy Wiggins along with fiddle, and in some cases was a fiddle player he had named Speedy McNatt to play the fiddle for him. And as I mentioned the last time, I think I came out sideways. I was trying to show some of the Camden albums. So I'm just going to show 3 or 4 of them again that I was sharing then. One was Bill Monroe, nice early RCA Camden release. This featured his 1940 and 1941 recordings, first solo recordings he made for RCA, Mule Skinner Blues, The Fiddle Piece, Katie Hill, Six White Horses with Clyde Moody as his guitarist singing the lead, and others. And my favorite, Hank Snow, Southern Cannonball, which featured his early 50s singles, some of them such as the Boogie Woogie Flying Cloud, when Mexican Joe met Jolie Blonde, his guitar instrumental of Under the Double Eagle, and Paving the Highway with Tears, a very fine album. Probably my favorite Camden album of him released in the early 60s was The One and Only, which had Ladies Man on it, Record of the Old 97, again is instrumental of Carnival of Venice, Anniversary Blue Yodel, which he gave fresh versions to a lot of the old Jimmy Rogers songs that they made their way on these LPs. Also was a Slim Whitman release in the 60s, but it was of his 1949 and 1950 recordings for RCA, and they appeared on this album. They're a little bit different than his later 50s. These feature a lot of mandolin, mostly of Jethro Burns playing in the studio, Chet Atkins on guitar, Jerry Byrd on the steel guitar. I'm Casting My Lasso Towards the Sky, one of the best of his early numbers, is on here. And also one of the Porter Wagoner Camden releases of Your Old Love Letters, and this features many of his early 50s numbers back when he started for RCA. And finally, I love the County label. County label started releasing, I think around 64, 3 or 4 of their first LP. They did good quality releases of a lot of the 20s and 30s country music. I have a lot of those. A lot of those made their way. They had good sound quality on them. Their very first release was this one right here. It was County number 501. They pressed around 400 copies of that album. And this was various bands of the 20s. Some of the Roane County Ramblers, Burnett and Rutherford, Charlie Poole's band is on here, Low Stokes, and others. And if you know some of the history of country music, these names will certainly ring a bell. But if you ever want to check out some early string band music, County Records did a slew of quality old-time reissues. They did reissues on the Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers, Charlie Poole. They did Wade Maynor. They even did 50s bluegrass, such as Bill Clifton, the Lilly Brothers, and others. It was an excellent label, good sound quality. So that's just a few things that I have going on today. I wanted to share those things with you. Have the Louvin Brothers playing in the background, and I'll look forward to coming and checking with you again next time. So until next time, we'll see you now. Take care now. Bye.